Did you know there are over 7,000 rare diseases that are identified, and only 5% of those diseases have any kind of treatment whatsoever? My name is Jonathan James with Hope Charities, and today is Rare Disease Day. We wanted to take some time just to raise some awareness about some rare and ultra rare diseases that you may never have heard of. You may never meet a person that has ever been diagnosed with some of these rare diseases, but we know that it's really, really important to raise awareness so that we can advance treatment for everyone who is going through a rare or chronic disease. And access is something that we are all advocating for day in and day out. And for those of us living with rare diseases, it's important that we take moments and opportunities like this to raise awareness so that researchers, government officials, and all of the powers that be are able to continue to understand the needs of our community better and better. And today, I am really excited to invite a friend of mine to join me to talk a little bit more about something that they've been affected by, Factor VII Deficiency, and that is Amy Moon. Amy, thank you so much for joining me for the Hope Podcast today. It's great to see you.
Hi, great to see you too.
Well, I'm so excited about your story for a lot of different reasons. We've known each other for some time now, and you guys are truly champions when it comes to advocating for your own needs and yourself. And you've got an incredible story of some of the challenges you've faced and been through. But for those people who are just tuning in and never heard of Factor VII Deficiency and don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you're affected by bleeding disorder?
I'm Amy Moon. I'm from Gaylord, Michigan. I have Factor VII deficiency. I have a just turned 19-year-old that has it, son, and a 13-year-old son that has Factor VII deficiency.
Wow. And how long, just talk about diagnosis a little bit. How long have you been diagnosed? And also, how did you first find out?
It's been almost 9 years. It started with my oldest son. Around 10 is when he was diagnosed, but I can actually look back and see that we had several issues before. He had constantly had the nosebleeds that you've heard about in the car waking up. We were told things like, he was picking his nose, the air was dry, just numerous things. We'd take him to a neurologist because he had a couple of different head concussions from sports and playing. Neurologist said, no, there's no reason, nothing in his brain basically affecting his nosebleeds. He went to an ENT. Nobody could tell us anything. And now I look back, he was actually tested at the age of 7 for cancer. His lymph nodes were swelled up throughout his body and they could not tell us why. I look back and that was probably one of the most scariest times was that going through that testing. And I do know now that when you have a bleed inside your body, your lymph nodes are swelled up. But again, nobody tested for the bleeding disorder. He was going in for a TNA, getting his tonsils and adenoids out. And the new ENT we were getting ready to leave. We had everything set up for it. And then she says, by the way, does your son have a tendency to bleed? And we're like, well, yeah, he has these bleeding, nosebleeds that we, can't control. And we've had testing and all this done the last few years. And she's like, okay. And she ran some testing. We left and we got a call like a day or two later. And she said, we're not going to have, he can't have surgery. He has this very rare bleeding disorder. We're sending you down to DeVos Children's Hospital, which that's 3 hours away from us, and kind of scary and everything. But long story short, we got everything kind of figured out, and he got to have the surgery. And that doctor, the day after he had his surgery, he had to stay in the hospital for a few days after. She had told me, I remember standing there and looking out the window, and she's like, I don't normally test kids for this. And I just looked at her and I'm like, I think you saved my kid's life, because
Wow.
what if, he had that surgery and, bled out, and the hospital wouldn't have had his medication there. So even to this day, it gives me chills. We go through that. He's diagnosed, and the hematologist at DeVos Children's Hospital told me, you need to get tested to see if you have it. And I got tested. It was kind of funny. My local doctor did the testing for me and sent it out. And she called me. She's like, I don't know what it means, but I don't know if you have it. And I said, well, tell me what my numbers are. And they were like, I think I was like 40 or 41. And I'm like, oh, okay, I have it. Like, no big deal. Like, I had already learned enough within that month time of, you know, okay, I have it. And she's like, okay. So then after I was diagnosed, then we went and got Dakota tested. Um, and then he came back. His numbers were actually lower than mine and my older son Hunter's.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. And to think that you could have, I mean, your son could have passed away without, someone knowing what to look for, even thinking to look for, and then, also just how vulnerable you were as well, because it wasn't until later until you get tested and treatment as well. Is there anyone else in your family that you discovered later had it, or was it just the three of you?
Well, they are old
The
and
journey
stubborn.
continues.
I can almost 100% say that my mom has it. My grandma, she's
Wow.
recently passed away. I can tell you, she had real quick, she had a back surgery that she was, that older generation. She refused to have anybody else's blood in her body. She had donated 2 units of blood so she could have this back surgery. Let's just say she ended up with 10 units of blood because she bled out. So, I mean, that's just
Oh,
an example, so I can almost assuredly say that my mom's side has it. And I don't say
mhm.
my dad's side because I have it, but like with Hunter's dad and that, they got tested. They don't have it. He doesn't have it,
Mhm.
so the mutation came from my side and my side only. It's not both parents have to have it in order for the kids to have it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's amazing to me to think, one of the things I think that a lot of people suffer for a long time and they don't even know that this is maybe something that they're suffering with. And, specifically factor 7 deficiency is considered a rare, ultra rare. I mean, bleeding disorders in general are rare for the most part, except for maybe von Willebrand's type 1, which is not considered a rare disease. But outside of that, you have many of the bleeding disorders, especially that are affected by the clotting cascade, are considered rare diseases. Factor 7 is considered to have less than 1,000 people, anywhere between 600 to like 1,100 people total in the population in the United States, which makes it not only ultra rare, but most would classify that as an orphan disease status. And as a result of that, I think so often you could live suffering and have all these challenges. You could have organs that shut down. You can have a brain hemorrhage. You could have anything could go awry at any time. And thankfully, factor 7 is one of the diseases that actually does have a treatment, but it's very difficult to get diagnosed. It's very difficult to get the treatment. Have you guys had difficulties in that area too, just getting access to medication as well?
Um, can I jump back to the getting diagnosed part real quick?
100%. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Um, it answered a lot of my problems. I started my menses when I was 10. I
Wow.
lost too much blood giving birth. My first son was getting shipped over to the NIC unit 24 hours after he was born, Hunter. And the doctor that my OB had told me I had to stay at this hospital, and it's like, this is my first son, and you're trying to tell me I can't go with my son. He's getting shipped to another hospital. But I had lost too much blood. Long story short, I won. I went with my son. um, but 1 month before I was officially diagnosed, 1 month exactly, I had a hysterectomy. So when I went to my OB, which was 2 weeks after my diagnosis, which would have been my 6-week checkup, I walked in and I said, hey, guess what? I know I have all these bleeding problems. And he's like, oh, yeah. I said, yeah, I have a bleeding disorder. He goes, huh, that'll answer it. It like, to me, that's just kind of funny now. Like, how, oh, that answers it. But it's like, why wouldn't you have ever tested? I mean, I, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have been or had to have that hysterectomy. But
Yeah.
medicine has been interesting. Um, Finding doctors first that understand it. Being a very rare bleeding disorder, most of the hematologists have never dealt with us. My first couple
Mhm.
hematologists that I went to um, treated me like I was a factor A or B patient. and your numbers are too high. You're not going to have any bleeding problems, blah, 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 blah. Even though I could tell them stuff I had as a kid and, even as an adult,
Right.
they were just at that mindset that my numbers in the 40s were just, I'm not going to have any problems.
Which,
Um,
just for the
so
audience sake that
finding a
might
doctor.
just for the audience sake who might not know anything about factor 7 yet, I mean, this is an important fact, is that one of the things that really distinguishes factor 7 from many of the other bleeding disorders out there is that your levels are not exactly tethered to the symptoms. You can have high levels and have a lot of bleeding symptoms. You can have low levels and have very few bleeding symptoms. It's different than, say, a factor 8 deficiency or even some factor 9 deficiency issues where the levels are directly tethered. But in your case, you can have higher levels and still have gobs of bleeding, and so that's why it's so important, I think, for the getting to the right physician that really does understand that and understand that disease state, because it isn't exactly the same as the other bleeding disorders, right?
Right. I know patients that have zero factor 7 and they've never had a bleed in their life. And I know people that are 30s that are crippled. And when I say 30s, their numbers are in their 30s. I know people that are in their 60s that bleed like a severe,
Hmm.
So yes, our numbers don't correlate with our bleeds. I had doctors in the past tell me that I couldn't have a spontaneous bleed. I proved them wrong. I
Right.
had a muscle bleed right in my my arm here, and unfortunately, with that, you don't get the treatment that I should have, and now I have like a permanent damage in that spot because the blood just pooled
Mm.
there. But that's also helped me learn to advocate for that medicine. My boy's doctor, he's a world renowned doctor that goes all over, mainly for hemo A or Bs. Um, at first he was not even going to let us have any Novo 7. That's what we can use here on hand. Oh, you can get to the hospital. I'm like, the nearest hospital for us that might have this on hand is over an hour away. I live in rural Michigan.
Mm.
And so that was like a fight. I got a letter, that said that we could have this wasn't getting us meds. Well, the next year we went, we had a very severe snowstorm in April 19th weekend. So normally that's way out of our winter weekend, but we ended up with 39 inches of snow that weekend. And we were snowed in. And the doctor at first, and he's now, mind you, he's in Ann Arbor. He's 3.5 hours away from me, but they don't get the snow that we get. I'm in the snow belt part of Michigan. And so I just said, listen, I need to have stuff at home because I may not be able to get my kids to the hospital. You're telling me I have to, have this in my body within 30 minutes to an hour to get the bleeding to stop. And he goes, well, but the ambulance would come and get you. And I'm like, you don't understand. An ambulance ride, if you're snowed in like we are, is on a snowmobile. They will come and get me on a snowmobile, put you on a bed, and they'll snowmobile you out to a main road. That's when it was like, oh, yeah, maybe you need to have this. I wasn't infusing at the time, but at least if I had to call that ambulance and if they would have had to snowmobile into me, at least they could have given me the product,
Well, and
at my
again,
house.
for people that might not understand, I mean, this is a common thing, is for people with bleeding disorders to have medication on hand in their refrigerator and to be able to learn how to self-infuse. And so the fact that a doctor would tell you that in bleeding disorder land is a little shocking, because really and truly it should be something anyone with a diagnosis should have at least one dose on hand. But it's also so expensive that many hospitals do not carry it and stock the medication either. And the more rare it is, the more difficult it is to convince them to carry it, even if you live in that area. So these are issues that you've had to learn how to advocate for yourself and for your children, right?
Yeah. At first, like you just hit it on the head. It is so expensive. I know my little 2 milligram vial, I think is like $23,000. And I met with five of the biggest bigwigs, I say, that I could at our local hospital. I sat down and explained to them everything, like this is what's going on and what happens and stuff like that. They agreed to get one dose for each of us, have it on hand. This again was before I could, I had it at home and I learned to infuse. And so that was really neat. They got a folder for us at the ER that gives information about our stuff. Now, several years in, I have my own stuff at home. I infuse myself. I infuse my boys when they let me. Usually, they want me to take them to the hospital because I'm not the best poke. When you're trying to poke your own kid. But I'll give you an example. Just last month, Hunter ended up with a bleed. Mind you, he had just turned he was it was the his birthday weekend. Actually, he was 18, going to be 19. He had a bleed here at the house. I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to infuse you." Hunter does not like needles. He almost passed out
Oh
on
my
me.
god.
We held it. Let's get you to the hospital. We'll get it dealt with there. Well, the hospital was waylaying, and this is where my advocating came in. I said to my son, because again, he's 18, like, you've got to tell them that you got a bleeding disorder. He's like, Mom, it's fine. He's at the information desk and it's packed with everybody sick. And I'm like, no, you need to tell him. Finally, he doesn't say anything. I see one of the nurse people back there that I know. She walks. I said, hey, do you guys still have that folder back there? I said, he's got a bleeding disorder and we need to get him infused ASAP. They come out, they get they found the folder. Let's go. But
Wow.
the hard part was we get in this room and they just automatically assumed I was going to infuse,
Mm,
which normally I would, but my son is 18. He's not going to let me.
right.
So we go round and round and round. But so anyway, long story short, I had to pull out the letter because the nurse and the doctor were quite, rude. It's a different hospital now, different people running it. Um Traveling, everybody's traveling, so
Yeah.
nobody knows anybody there like it used to be. And so I pulled out this letter and I read in the black and white that basically we must infuse before any diagnosis, any testing, because they wanted to diagnose and test. And I read the whole thing out. So I mean, talk about having to advocate for
Wow.
yourself and just put your foot down. Um, I did hear them talking behind the scenes and I thought it was kind of rude, but they were like, normally they would do that stuff at home. And it's like, well, if you would have let me tell you that my kid almost passed out and I can't deal with that, that's hard for me.
Yeah.
you know, um, but yeah, on that note, real quick, we got shipped down to U of M because he ended up, he had an internal bleed. It was, his hand got smushed. And we check in, and this nurse kind of made me chuckle. I get talking. He did pass out. We walk into U of M. My kid passes out. So then mama goes in freak mode of that. I'm not freaked out about bleeding because I know how to handle that. He just doesn't
Right.
like needles. And I can laugh about it now, because it's done and over with. But so we get into this room. I hurry up and I infuse him because the ER there doesn't, even though it's U of M, they don't have his meds right there on hand. Of course, you got to get it from the pharmacy and all that. So we get in one of the ER rooms and we're sitting there chit chatting, and I was talking to the nurse real quick, an older lady, about this bleeding disorder. She says, "Oh, I know all about it. We learned all that stuff when we were in school." And I just laughed in my mind because I'm like, she's the first nurse, doctor, anything that I've ever had say, "Oh, I know everything about Factor VII Deficiency because they learned it in school." And I'm thinking, okay,
Deep
yeah.
breath.
Sorry, I'm ranting, or going on, but it's like
No,
it's just
yeah.
funny the advocating that you have to do and,
It's so
educating
true.
people.
And educating people that are professionals in the field is its own challenge because they sometimes they do think they know, and sometimes they, you know, I think that that's the thing with any rare disease is that oftentimes the person experiencing the rare disease and living with it, we have to become the most expert on our disease state because so often the specialists are not plentiful, and so it's something that we have to be able to learn for ourselves and advocate. And then that presents its own set of challenges because then you go to these clinicians or an emergency room or something like that, and they think they know but they don't really know. And so hopefully you luckily run into somebody that's a little bit empathetic and can listen to you first before starting to just try to you know act as if they know. That creates a hardship for a lot of people in this community.
It does. Like the arm bleed I was telling you about that I didn't know how to advocate all this stuff. The biggest thing is I knew this I was in a car crash and I have shoulder damage, neck damage, and this doctor, I knew him for years. I was a police officer for years, so he knew me that way. And when I was saying I had pain in my arm, like I'd never had in my life, I thought I was having a bleed. Um he grabbed my shoulder and I winced and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's your rotator." I'm like, "No, it's not that." Anyway, I pushed enough to get an ultrasound because what happened, he called you at the time I was going to University of Michigan hematology, got the on-call hematologist who told the ER doc, numbers are too high, she cannot have a spontaneous bleed. So I did get the ultrasound, and it's kind of funny because the tech had to do the shoulder, but then said, "Where's your pain?" Went to the pain and said, "Oh yeah, you're definitely bleeding right there." But when I went back to the ER doc, I said, "What about that? What about that? I'm bleeding right there." And, "Oh no, there's fluid in there, but I don't know what it is." I can laugh now, but again, at that time, I didn't know to call my regular
Right.
hematologist. I thought just and they didn't. So that that's I didn't get, I think that was April, and I didn't go to my regular doctor or hematologist till August. So learned
Mhm.
how to advocate, and you call your doctor right away. There's so much to learn. It's so scary at first, even that was a couple years
Mhm.
into knowing, but I still didn't know that I could have a spontaneous bleed because they told me I couldn't.
So true. Wow. Tell me a little bit about too, like you've been very involved in the community of people with bleeding disorders, and just having a support system and building your own support system and your own knowledge base, I think is one of the things that's really, really, really important. But not all things are equal, and so it takes some time sometimes to figure out what community you fit in the best and what really makes the most sense for you. But how important has community in your own personal journey been for learning how to advocate, and also just helping you to cope with the challenges you faced?
I don't know where I would be without the community because I'd never heard of bleeding disorder. Again, like I said, even being a police officer, I was not trained for, I knew how to do a tourniquet and stuff like that, but knew nothing about bleeding disorders. Like in my
Right.
very faint memory, would I ever think of somebody with bleeding? You know what I mean? I never really thought of, you heard about maybe a hemophiliac once in your life, but I didn't know anything. So
Right.
to get into this community and have people like Hope and meeting you and even my local hemophilia foundation, I that's where I started from.
Mhm.
I hit this head on. I mean, I went to Lansing Days, to the then they sent me to I went to Washington D.C. to advocate. I mean, I hit it head on. Um,
Yeah.
I I think some of my injuries from my accident, like, are worse because I had a bleeding disorder and didn't know it and wasn't able to heal properly.
Mhm.
But I also believe that God had a plan for me. That life was done, and now this is my life, and I can be here for my kids. I'm here for whenever they have a bleed. My older son, shoot, he's broke both arms at one time. He got front teeth knocked out. Sports. I mean, I let my kids play stuff. I don't keep the bubble. I wanted to at first, but
Yeah.
um, and to just help educate people. Like I
Mhm.
think that was, God's plan was to get me into these communities to help teach other people, use your voice, be strong,
So true.
stand up to doctors
Right.
because I've had to.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that I often say, I know you've heard me say this a lot, is just that the best thing of being diagnosed with a rare disease or a bleeding disorder specifically is the community that comes along with it. And I think so often, my life is better being connected to you and so many others. And I'm learning every day, and I've been living with this my whole life. I was diagnosed when I was super young, but there's so many people out there that I think are suffering unnecessarily because they're not diagnosed in a timely way. And these are the things that we have to continue to use our voice to advocate for, to share our story, and to be able to raise public awareness about these challenges. Because I do think that there's still a lot of people out there that are suffering unnecessarily in the United States. That really, if they just knew that they could get a little bit of treatment to help them along the way, it could actually be life changing for them, and life saving.
I agree. I think also we need to get rid of the stigma from the old people.
Mhm.
Like they don't talk about their medical stuff.
Mhm.
Again, I my grandma, for example, before she passed away, had fell and hit her head a couple different times, and I begged my aunt. Um, to like, if they can't get it to stop, tell them to give her Novo 7 because I know she has it.
Yeah.
My mom is just that old stubborn one that says, I've lived this long without knowing, why do I need to know now? And it's like, they've stopped so many surgeries on her because she's been bleeding out and stuff. But, I can't sometimes your family's going to be your hardest people to convince to get tested and to get help. But it hasn't stopped me from trying to help other people. I know so many parents like, oh, my kid's got this, whether it be factor 7 or, 8 or 9. And, but I sit there and I tell them, you got to get tested, especially as a woman now, we're learning that women aren't just carriers,
Mm.
you actually, if you're having these bleeding episodes, you actually have probably hemophilia A, B, or, von Willebrand's, or, um, don't ever give up on that. That's the biggest thing is like, I won't ever give up trying to teach people or help people, ever
Mhm.
since, my diagnosis and learning. And that's one of my biggest things is just trying to help people come together, come to hope and come to at least go to your local chapters too.
Yeah, absolutely. Get involved. I think that a lot of times we don't realize like how many, especially in bleeding disorders, we're kind of spoiled. We have a great network and a long history of people that have been really gathering together and learning from each other. That lived experience is so important to advancing your own knowledge and your own ability. Sometimes it's just the little things like learning how to not be an adversary with your, clinic visit and your physician meeting, but learning how to actually advocate by healthy bringing in the data and the science to them, bringing in some research reports that maybe is outside of your comfort zone, but it does help to actually help their knowledge base grow to see things maybe from your seat. But those little tips and tricks that we learn along the way is really such a wonderful way for us to be able to learn from each other. And you really, I mean, I do believe that we're accustomed to dealing with a lot of unhealthy judgment from folks from the outside, and it's the most painful, I think, when it comes from people that should know better, but they still judge us inappropriately. And I just think that learning how to cope with that and overcome that, and what kind of tips and tricks that you can use to sort of like get beyond those situations when that is a hindrance in your own healthcare or your child's healthcare. Those are the things we learn from each other that we cannot learn any other way. There's no textbook that teaches all of those things. And so I think relationships are super important, and just knowing who to call. The old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think that truer words could not be spoken, especially of any rare disease, but especially in bleeding disorders. We have a great network of folks that are willing to help and jump in. And Amy, you're such an incredible advocate for others in that way. And I know that if there's anybody listening right now that goes, man, I think this might be my story, or I know that I have factor 7 deficiency, never met anyone else like Amy, I'm going to volunteer you right now, but you can put your name and your information in the comments below, and we'll make certain that Amy sees it. But I know that you're always willing to help other people, and I so appreciate that about you, because I've seen how much of an advocate you are for your own family, but also help so many others learn how to advocate for themselves too.
Yeah, I'm putting it in there right now because I threw my email in there. I'm not the
Awesome.
best at answering phone calls if I don't know who it is, so
Yeah,
we'll start with
no
an email.
problem.
No,
That's
absolutely.
great.
I have so many stories that I could tell, and I'm sure that would help other people. Um, real quick, you kind of talked. You made me think of something about. Again, advocating to your doctor. I had genetic testing done, and our genetic testing showed that we had a mutation that the doctor had never seen before. Dr. Nugent out of California, she does a lot of testing for us factor 7 patients, and she had upped our diagnosis to mild moderate. But my regular doctor, well, not regular, but our hematologist, they didn't want to accept the information from the regular the Dr. Nugent. So I just never stop pushing to learn, to get whatever test you can
Mm,
get, and stand your ground. And I think if we can get more people to be uh like me, I guess, vocal and not afraid to stand your ground,
not
and keep
afraid.
those connections.
That's so good, Amy. That's so good. Well, thank you for being there and for being the voice of confidence, and also just being a force to be reckoned with, because it's important to I do think that it's important that we have to just continue to learn how to stand up for ourselves, but also advocate for ourselves in insurance and all the other challenges that we face. There's so many things we face, but all the more reason why we need each other. And one of the things I love about this day and age, living with technology like we do, is us being able to have a conversation like this today. And here you are in rural Michigan, and I'm all the way down in Louisiana, and there's no normal day that you and I would be able to get together to have coffee, but we can have moments like this to be able to talk using technology. And I just appreciate your willingness to do that and be available. And thank you for sharing your story today. Thank you for being on the Hope Podcast. But thank you just for continuing to forge a path for your own family and also for so many people in the community. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye.
A big thank you to Amy and her whole family, really, for joining me today on Rare Disease Day to share their story about living with Factor VII Deficiency. It is an incredible inspiration to be able to listen to people like Amy who have really overcome so much. If this meant something to you, please consider liking and also sharing this with your family and friends. It's a great way to bring awareness to rare diseases on such a special day like today. And like I said before, we really do appreciate you tuning in and also being here. If there's any questions that you have or any things that you would like to know more about, you can check out our website and learn more there, as well as email us anytime at events@hope-charities.org. And we would love to be able to respond to you and to be able to share any information we can to help you along in your journey. But without any more ado, I just want to say thank you so much to Amy, and thank you again for tuning in for Rare Disease Day as we enjoy an opportunity to be able to collaborate and learn more about these rare diseases that we live with day in and day out. Thanks again for joining me for the Hope Podcast, and we'll see you in the next